Lying has always been a tool of political power grabbing. Often it has deadly and disastrous results. And I'm going to talk about this today. And I worked very hard to be as nonpartisan as I can be, because I'm really concerned how normalized blatant lying has become. I think it's a cultural cancer that is threatening our democracy. In February of 2016, after a habitual liar took office in the White House, I talked about this on another Sunday morning in a talk that is entitled "The Press, Lies, and Politics." And I invoked the spirits of Edward R. Murrow and Katharine Graham. These were journalistic heroes who respectively defeated Joseph McCarthy and Richard Nixon, two masterful manufacturers of misinformation. But today, I'm really worried that the media is not going to be able to save us. Too often, the media pretends that a balanced presentation is hearing from one expert and one lunatic opposed to the expert. That type of balance promotes lunacy. Murrow, in fact, put it this way. He said, "One cannot accept that there are on every story two equal and logical sides to an argument." So, frankly, political lying is unacceptable. And I don't think there's an opposite argument for that. So today I'm going to explain how lying reinforces itself and spreads. And then I'll offer some brief historical examples of deadly political lies to set the context. And then I'm going to focus on the big lie that the 2020 election was illegitimate, that it was stolen. That is a toxic lie that motivated the attack on the Capitol, and it's poisoning our democracy generally. And to conclude, I'm going to call on a roll call of conservative and Republicans and military officers who condemn the big lie. I think we need to amplify the voices of conservatives and Republicans and military officers, because they are best positioned to convince some of the people who believe Trump's big lie that's destroying the integrity of the Republican Party. It's weakening faith in our elections, and it's motivating dangerous extremists. David Laufman, who is a former senior Justice Department official, explained how a sitting president defeated in a free and fair election personally and repeatedly pressured the Justice Department leaders to help him foment a coup in a last-ditch attempt to cling to power. And Laufman added in his article, quote, "That should shock the conscience of every American, regardless of political persuasion." But we're less shocked because lying is so normalized. So whatever your political persuasion is, whatever your opinion is of Biden or Trump, we have to work together to build a consensus that the election was free and fair. That's what I'm going to try to argue today. So let me start with how lies beget lies. It was the novelist Walter Scott who wrote, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practiced to deceive." And that's true in part because lying leads to more lying. Scientific American writer Simon Makin explained during the 2016 campaign election, which was full of lies, studies that demonstrate that the more a person lies, the easier it seems to become. Laboratory experiments documented in the publication of Nature Neuroscience confirm that dishonesty grows with repetition. A neural mechanism called emotional adaptation leads liars to lie more. With repetition, there's less a negative reaction to hold you back. Michael Barbaro made the same claim in a recent podcast of The Daily entitled "Ignoring the Lie Emboldens the Liar." And people have ignored Trump's lying quite often. From what I heard, it began early in his life. And his lies about election integrity have been most public since he insisted that the 2016 election, before it had even occurred, was rigged. Lying spreads due to what's called the illusory truth effect. This psychological tendency is to believe claims, however outlandish, if the claims are repeated frequently enough. In addition, lies spread faster than truth, especially when social media accelerates outrageous lies, which garner greater attention. People click on the things that shock them. The comedian Sacha Baron Cohen pointed this out in a wonderful speech to the Anti-Defamation League in 2019. I urge you to watch it. And if you send me an email, I'll send you my talk, which has all these links in it. Cohen explained that political lies would not be so powerful if it wasn't for the social media giants that allow these lies to spread. Repeating lies is simple and effective. It doesn't take intelligence or integrity. Joseph Heller explained this in Catch-22, where lying was part and parcel of the absurd overlap of a stultifying bureaucracy and the madness of war. Through one character, Heller explained that lying was easy. Quote, it was almost no trick at all. He saw to turn vice into virtue, slander into truth, impotence into abstinence, arrogance into humility, plunder into philanthropy, thievery into honor, blasphemy into wisdom, brutality into patriotism, and sadism into justice. Anyone could do it. It required no brains at all. It merely required no character, end quote. Well, while no brains are required, a lot of money was needed to spread election skepticism. There's a recent article by Jane Mayer in the New York Times about how the big lie was spread by moneyed interests. Sorry, it's the New Yorker, she wrote. There was an article called The Big Money Behind the Big Lie, and she exposes the sordid roles of Patrick Byrne of Overstock.com and Doug Logan, the CEO of Cyber Ninjas, in demanding unnecessary recounts. Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs said that the conspiracy-driven audit in Arizona looked so comical you have to laugh at it sometimes. But she also warned, quote, it's dangerous. It's feeding the kind of misinformation that led to the January 6th insurrection, end quote. Other shadowy groups with names that sound legitimate have also been sowing skepticism, including a group called the Election Integrity Project, Freedom Works, and the National Election Protective Initiative. They're all amplifying the lie. Now, there are plenty of politically motivated examples in history which promote strategic lying. Machiavelli wrote in the 1500s that lying was acceptable for anyone who, when telling the truth, quote, would place him at a disadvantage. Besides, Machiavelli pointed out that people are easily duped, which makes lying so effective. Now, we Americans prefer to claim that we're above lying, thus exploring the popularity of the fable that George Washington could not tell a lie. So we often study the political dishonesty of other nations, and two of our favorites are Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, with classic examples of how lying was everywhere. I mean, the Holocaust was fueled by Hitler's lies about the Jewish people, lies about their culpability for the defeat in World War I, and claims about the superiority of the Aryan race. And these lies and the gullibility of the general population contributed to the killing of 20 million people. The historian Timothy Snyder explained in the New York Times that lies often remain unchallenged and they can fester for years before exploding. And in Germany, the explosion was Nazism. Political power in the Soviet Union was built on a foundation of lies. George Kennan, while he was serving at the US Embassy in Moscow, said, "Here men determine what are true and false." A reporter, Andrew Higgins, wrote about how Kennan thought it possible to make the Soviet people, quote, feel and believe practically anything. When the Kremlin put out a lie, it attains the validity and all the powers of truth. And that had deadly consequences, like at the reactor Chernobyl, where lies obscured systemic problems with Soviet nuclear reactors. But since the party line was that there was nothing wrong with the reactors, flaws were covered up until in 1986, the meltdown killed 54 people immediately, eventually 4,000, along with hundreds of thousands of animals. Thousands of square kilometers in Russia will remain unusable for thousands of years. The International Atomic Energy Commission estimated that the financial cost of the disaster was over $235 billion. And Mikhail Gorbachev, Soviet premier at the time of the meltdown, said that Chernobyl was the real cause of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Lies kill people and empires. Two books that I read in college, Bob Kaiser's Russia and Hendrik Smith's The Russians, explore the cult of lying that was the USSR. Both of the authors marvel at the degree which facts were less important than the declarations of the Communist Party. Andrew Higgins concluded his article by saying that Kennan's insight, quote, now has a haunting resonance in America, where tens of millions believe a truth invented by a President Trump, that Joseph Biden Jr. lost the November election and became president-elect only through fraud. This haunting resonance has echoed through US history, where lying has had deadly results. It's not just other countries. I mean, let's start with the Mexican-American War, which was built on misinformation promoted by President Polk. His slanted proclamation that Mexicans had, quote, shed American blood on American soil led to the death of 13,000 people. President William McKinley, eager for expansion, used the same tactic in 1898. When the USS Maine, docked in Havana, exploded due to an accidental fire, McKinley accused the Spanish of sabotage and he promptly declared war. 400 American soldiers died in the immediate fighting. 10 times more people died in the Philippines, which Americans seized from Spain during this war. And then the horror of Americans' engagement in Vietnam was greatly due to the lies from one administration to the next. Military carnage accelerated when President Johnson placed US warships in disputed waters in the Gulf of Tonkin and then lied about being attacked. And this lie led to the death of over 50,000 American soldiers, tens of thousands of other foreign troops, and millions of Vietnamese. And what led to the more recent death of 7,000 US military personnel and 200,000 civilians in Iraq? The Bush administration lies about weapons of mass destruction. I mean, Bush hounded advisors to, quote, find me a way to do this, to invade Iraq, despite evidence that Iraq was involved in 9/11. And those who got in the way of Bush's intention to get Saddam, regardless of the facts, like journalist Joe Wilson, were harassed and marginalized. Vice President Cheney knew he was lying when he said on August 26, 2002, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use against our friends and against us. It's less clear whether Secretary of State Colin Powell knew he was lying when he accused Iraq of attempting to buy yellow cake uranium for nuclear weapons. But you all saw on February 5th of 2003 when he stood up at the UN and said, every statement I make today is backed by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid evidence. That just wasn't true. A couple of years later, Powell admitted that the incident was a blot on his record. He told Barbara Walters, it will always be a part of my record. It was painful. It's painful now. And it's painful for hundreds of thousands of Americans who lost loved ones or family members due to Iraq. Now, obviously, the lie about the 2000 election has not as directly caused thousands and thousands of deaths, but 5 people died when a mob challenged the election results and attacked the Capitol. Ashley Babbitt, part of the mob, was shot and killed as she began climbing through a broken window. Kevin Greason, who was in the mob, died of a heart attack during the chaos. 34-year-old Roseanne Boyland, a Trump fanatic, was crushed to death by the mob. Benjamin Phillips, a founder of a pro-Trump website called Trumparoo, died of a stroke during the melee. And Officer Brian Sicknick was beaten by rioters and died. Dozens of other officers are suffering from mental and physical trauma. Lies have consequences. Lies can kill. Many officers believe that the January 6th attack was just the beginning of trouble stirred up by the outrageous lie about the election. And of course, there are other costs. I mean, false claims of electoral malfeasance are causing voter suppression. State legislators have passed laws that make it harder to vote and open the door to manipulation of vote counting. Many new Republican candidates are campaigning on the outrageous lie. Lies about the election are lowering our confidence in the democratic process, and public servants are leaving office. I mean, at the Department of Justice, the head of the election's prime branch, Richard Pilger, resigned in protest over the lie. 23 Democratic attorneys general signed a letter criticizing claims of election fraud, which have, quote, the terrible cost of undermining trust in the democratic institutions on which this country depends. Now, years ago, I spoke about this and linked it to a more fundamental attack on the nature of truth. And I remember the day on January 22nd, 2017, when White House advisor Kellyanne Conway turned demonstrable falsehoods into alternative facts. While administrations have issued lies in the past, few have done it so blatantly in the face of contrary evidence. Richard Cohen, the columnist, puts it, they lie with abandon and when caught, double down. I mean, fact checkers for the Washington Post said that Trump made 30,573 false or misleading statements while president. And that acceptance of lying, that normalization, has made it easier to sell the big lie. Trump encouraged and still encourages other peddlers of disinformation other than himself, like Steve Bannon or Alex Jones or Fox News. And they're highly skilled at dividing the public into hostile camps while they manipulate those lies for power and for profit. And due to misinformation, American voters are less free than ever before to make independent decisions based on evidence. Those who study the evidence, regardless of political affiliation, know the truth. The courts have consistently ruled against suits challenging election integrity. More than 50 spurious post-election lawsuits have been thrown out. Some courts have rebuked those who, without evidence, push these outlandish claims of voter fraud. But the courts don't seem to change the minds of those convinced by this toxic lie. And Democrats and progressives don't fare any better in changing the minds of conspiracy theorists. And that's why I think it's imperative that Republicans and conservatives and military officers proclaim the legitimacy of this election, as well as how the lies fueled the January 6th insurrection. Immediately after January 6th, the Republican House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said the president bears responsibility for the attack, that Trump bears the responsibility. But over time, McCarthy and many others have reverted to repeating the lie. Exactly 6 months after the Washington Post editorial board, after the attack, the editorial board reminded us that most House Republicans voted to reject certification of Biden's electoral votes. In addition, 1/3 of the nearly 700 Republicans running for the US House or Senate accept Trump's big lie and are campaigning on a platform of dishonesty. The Post editorial boards that said that while this pandering could be fatal to US democracy, the big lie festers unchallenged until it becomes an article of faith. So I want to hold up those Republicans and Republican nominated officials and military folks who might be able to better convince people about the truth of the election. The head of the US Election Assistance Commission, Trump nominated Benjamin Hovland that I mentioned, explained, quote, time and again, when the rubber hits the road, there's no evidence for fraud. Veteran Republican Party election lawyer Ben Ginsburg stated outright that elections are not rigged. Christopher Wray, Trump-appointed FBI director, said that we have not seen historically any kind of coordinated national voter fraud in a major election, whether it's by mail or otherwise. Chris Krebs, an assistant secretary in the Department of Homeland Security during the Trump administration, declared that there was no indication of evidence of hacking or compromise of election systems. He was fired by Trump right after he said that. And in state after state, officials have refuted outrageous election lies. Republican Gabriel Sterling, manager of Georgia's voting system, declared that the claims of voter fraud are, quote, hoaxes and nonsense. The Republican-chaired Michigan Senate Oversight Committee confirmed that Biden won fair and square, concluding that there was, quote, no evidence of widespread or systemic fraud in Michigan. A number of Republican secretaries of state resisted pressure to lie. The most publicized was Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, who received a phone call from Trump demanding changes in Georgia's election tally. Even after Trump pleaded, fellas, this is a quote, fellas, I need 11,000 votes, give me a break. Raffensperger stood firm, declaring that truth matters. Scott Schwab, the Secretary of State in Kansas, declared that his state did not experience any widespread fraud. In Arizona, where Senate Republicans pushed through a sham audit of votes in Maricopa County, the Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, resisted the lie and then received death threats, referring to what has been called the Arizona fraudit. One Republican operative said, it's a failure, it's a joke. Some Capitol Hill Republicans still tell the truth. Adam Kinzinger, Republican representative from Illinois, pleaded that we stop spreading debunked misinformation. This is getting insane. That's what he said. Republican Senator Joni Ernst declared on Fox Radio, we believe in honesty. We believe in the integrity of our election system. To insinuate that Republican and Democratic candidates paid to throw off the election, I think is absolutely outrageous. Republican Senator Mitt Romney said that Trump was wrong to say that the election was rigged, corrupt, or stolen, adding that doing so damages the cause of freedom here and around the world, weakens the institutions that lie at the foundation of the republic, and recklessly inflames destruction and dangerous passions. On November 9th of last year, reporters of the staff of The Hill magazine published a letter from 31 former Republican members of Congress that stated, we believe the statements by President Trump alleging fraud in the election are efforts to undermine the legitimacy of the election and are unacceptable. My own governor, Larry Hogan, a Republican, said that there's no defense for the president's comments undermining our democratic process. And despite displaying a startling level of loyalty to Trump on many occasions, even former Attorney General William Barr admitted that investigators from the Department of Justice, quote, have not seen fraud on a scale that would have affected a different outcome in the election. This summer, the Washington Post reported that late in 2020, justice officials resisted Trump when he said, quote, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me. And few high in Republican circles have been so outspoken as Liz Cheney, who was stripped of power as conservative conference chair for her allegiance to truth. She declared unequivocally that the big lie was, quote, a poison in the bloodstream of our democracy. The election is over, that is the rule of law, that is our constitutional process. Those who refuse to accept the rulings of our courts are at war with the Constitution, end quote. Well, this war was waged at the Capitol on January 6th, and it continues today in editorial pages and in social media. And the battlefield analogy of it being a war makes me particularly worried when I saw that 124 former military officers signed a letter challenging the legitimacy of the election. And this letter, which can be found on a website of Flag Officers for America, reinforces false narratives believed by 40% of Americans. It's particularly convincing to many paramilitary conspiracy theorists. So that's why I say that military officers who have already spoken out should speak out more, because they're often admired by groups like Oath Keepers or Proud Boys. But as Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth, a veteran and a recipient of the Purple Heart, explained that defending the facts is difficult because people often choose superficial patriotism over truth. Duckworth quoted George Washington's farewell address when she warns us to, quote, guard against impostures of pretend patriotism. Those who paraded American flags through the Capitol on January 6th are pretend patriots, because the truth is patriotic. As I worked on this talk, I asked myself questions like, is defending the obvious truth political? Is it partisan? Were 10 former defense secretaries being political when they declared that we must stop questioning the results of the election? Was retired Air Force Colonel Mary Beth Ehrlich being partisan when she condemned the big lie as a part of a pattern of, quote, very anti-democratic behavior? Maybe some who declared themselves patriotic when attacking Capitol Police and desecrating our temple of democracy will think twice if more military folk defend the truth. Allegiance to the truth is patriotic. I mean, I started this piece with a metaphor of the big lie being like a cancer. But maybe cancer is not scary enough to shock people because many cancers can be cured these days. What we now face is more like a monster, which despite being a fabrication, scares people into conspiracy thinking. And I thought maybe that's why Judge Matthew Braun said that the big lie about the election was like Frankenstein's monster, quote, haphazardly stitched together with strained legal arguments and speculative accusations. Republican Party veteran Ben Ginsburg, who co-chaired the bipartisan Presidential Election Commission, compared the big lie to the Loch Ness monster, because he said it was like a myth that runs counter to all evidence. Whatever metaphor you use, whether it's cancer or a monster or something else, we have to encourage those loyal to both our country and the truth to work together. And it's why I'm exploring coalitions that draw on members from both political parties. On Capitol Hill, for example, there's the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is dedicated to finding common ground on many key issues facing our nation. And for a few years, I've been impressed with the Lincoln Project. Its members worry that Trumpism is threatening the existence of the Republican Party. It may be too late. Last December, Lincoln Project co-founder Reed Galen spoke about those who voted for Trump, saying, regardless of their reasoning, we must begin communicating with these voters who have fallen in line behind a megalomaniac with authoritarian goals. We don't know the future of the United States, but we have to work to keep it from falling into the chronic addiction to lying that was at the base of the Nazi Empire and Stalinist Soviet Union. So I conclude by asking you to do what you can to build consensus about the facts, work to build common ground regarding the 2020 election, reach out to those of diverse political opinion to call out the outrageous lies about the 2020 election that threaten the future of our country. Thanks for listening. I look forward to your comments.